again. Welcome. All right, so Mark and I want to introduce our panel. So we'll start here with Matthew Schwartz. Join us from Altura Associates, all the way from California. Hey. And next we have Zachariah Noble, Constellation. So the panel today is really focused on the end use of these technologies, both with true end users, Zach, and the consultants who help them specify good projects. And next we have Ben Talbot of the DLR Group, consultant. And finally, Rob Murchison, principal with Intelligent Buildings. All right. All right, thanks everybody. So we got 2 microphones here. We'll pass it back and forth to let you offer your comments. And what we want to do is start with some questions. They're going to come from Mark and I, and at the end we'll have a chance for some audience questions.
Yeah, and we definitely want to enlist your assistance and help towards the end, and don't be bashful. We're all one community, so if you've got questions, feel free to ask this panel. So, without further ado, let's start. In all honesty, we did have a conversation. We did talk amongst ourselves about some of the types of questions that we might ask, but John and I might throw a few surprises to this panel and as well. So we'll see where it goes. So first question, and I guess Rob, since you're on the right, let's start with you. How has semantic tagging affected your business?
Wow. Hand on the mic.
That's a big question.
Open one for you.
Our organization was sort of founded around that, founded around that concept. I think it's important, and for everyone in this room to understand that we're a community that really understands the value of data. That's why we're all here. What is interesting to us in our exposure as we talk to a lot of our prospects and our customers is that there's a smaller percentage out there in the marketplace of folks that truly understand the true value of data than what we have in this room. If we look across this room, I would say almost 100% of us are here because we know that data is very valuable. But to out there in the broader marketplace, 87 billion square feet of commercial real estate that exists in United States, there is a very small percentage of folks that truly see that value. And to me, to answer your question, what I think is impacting it the most is that the technology is now becoming more of a necessity versus an option, because if folks are going to be able to drive towards making good decisions around sustainability and energy reduction, operational costs, and occupant experience, it has to start with data. And being able to work with an organization to figure that out is where we see the opportunity truly impacting our business.
So just real quick before you pass it on to Matt is, when you go into a potential client engagement on the consultative side, do the potential client ask you about data and analytics, or is that something that you bring up as part of a good strategic approach to?
Well, that's a great question, because typically where we like to get started is that data is a foundation to an organization achieving their goals. So the first questions we're typically answering or discovering is what their problems are. And their problems typically fall into 3 categories: sustainability, an occupant experience, and reducing operating costs broadly. And as you peel back the onion, if you will, it always gets back to data.
Okay.
And we can talk about this more. The data in the conversation is a foundational thing, but data alone doesn't solve the problem.
Right, good. All right, Matt, how has tagging and semantic modeling affected your business?
Data-driven solutions, what does that mean, right? Everybody says that. Well, for us, I would tell you that fundamentally the way our organization operates was changed by semantic tagging. I would also argue that getting connected first is step one, and then the semantic tags change the way you can look at that data. As a commissioner or a consultant who's going into these buildings and looking for operational opportunities that affect all three things that Rob mentioned, you know, we've always clamored to get our hands on as much data as we can. Now, if you go back some years, that was very static. That was a static effort. We'd be getting spreadsheets. We'd be getting building data in bits and pieces and specific snapshots in time. Getting connected and having a platform that lets us analyze data in real time, predominant amount of that data coming from the building automation systems, has changed the way we operate as a business. We haven't done the static approach in over 6 years. You know, we take static data now and put that into our analytics platform so we can cross-correlate it with the trends and the live streaming data that we're getting from the automation systems. So, you know, we're not looking back on that, and it's just changed the way that we approach commissioning completely.
Great. Zach, sort of an end user here, how's it really affected y'all's business and, you know, some of the things that you guys are doing as a leading energy provider out there?
So Constellation Energy does a lot of things. You know, they sell commodities, gas, and electric, but there's also an energy efficiency division. And the semantic tagging model that you mentioned is I guess a means or an achievement. I almost think of it, an analogy comes to mind when you ask that question. It's like a left door in a hallway that people have been walking along for a while. It's a platform. It's allowed us to migrate from what we had an internal tool, analytics, throw data in and create the analytics. And 3 years ago, Constellation decided that they were going to go with something that was more of an industry standard, and Haystack tag model and software platform is what they decided upon. And I really think, you know, what comes to my mind is that as a tool, being able to collect data from a variety of different EMS systems that the customers may have unknowingly been walking down that hall thinking, you know, that's what they're used to, that's what they've done for 30 and 40 years, that those contractors who put in the hardware and will provide some degree of information about it maybe never realized that there was a way to get beyond their own vision, and the semantic model is allowing us to create reports, perform analytics in a common fashion across a broad spectrum of tools.
Great.
And so it's you know, adopting an industry standard and opening doors and opportunities that weren't there before.
Yeah. Now, Ben, from DLR, truly an engineering company in every sense of the word, a true engineering. You guys are sort of really new to Haystack and data and analytics. Tell us about, you know, again, how it's affected your business and where you guys are going with this.
Yeah, so we got started through our retro commissioning practice. We're primarily doing retro commissioning through utility programs, have been doing it for a long time. And, you know, that process, we were, you know, for the most part, going into a building, downloading trends in Excel and making graphs. And, you know, since we've adopted Haystack and analytics, you know, it's changed the process up a bit where, you know, do a little bit of integration at the start, but then the amount of data we have going in to start a project is just awesome. You know, we know so much about that building, and we have issues to go look at right when we're getting started. So it's been great in allowing us to deliver a better kind of end product to our customer and find more energy savings in buildings. And then, you know, we're certainly looking into how we can incorporate it more on the design side and kind of integrate in from the front design end to the back end operations.
Are you starting to use it also to try to extend the value of what DLR offers clients, as this is another piece in the world of what you guys truly do that you didn't offer maybe 5 or 6 years ago?
Absolutely. I'd say the Architecture 2030 Challenge is a really big driver kind of internally in our organization, and getting to buildings to be net zero ready by 2030. And, you know, I think we've realized that as we're you know, designing super efficient buildings with very low EUIs. You know, we need to make sure that, you know, particularly if we're contractually obligated to an EUI, we need to make sure that all the sequences are running as, you know, the design and engineer intended. And yeah, Haystack is enabling that.
Good.
So are you seeing that now your business you're with that customer for a longer period of time instead of design and buy? Are you making that transition that you're with them through some life cycle?
That's the hope. We're fairly new at it, but we certainly expect that's how, you know, the existing things in place will be going. Yeah, we certainly expect it to.
And John, to your point too, I think like putting analytics on a building, it was that eye-opening discovery for a lot of us in the commissioning sector that we have to make a transition to the continuous improvement phase. Because let's take new construction commissioning for an example. We might get a day or two on site with the building automation contractor, and he's going to deploy his sequences that an engineer of record put on a piece of paper and said, make the air handler do this thing. And we get to look at that with one moment in time. With analytics, now we watch that for a week, for 2 weeks, for a month, for the life of the building, if you will, and you start to learn things like these things aren't working 2 weeks later when the weather shifts. And those are the arguments that you use when you're working with a client to drive that kind of conversation into continuous improvement with analytics.
All right, so next question, I'm going to actually start again with Rob, but I want to key off the first thing you said. So that, you know, the building owners you talk to, very few of them, you know, understand how to use data, right? It's new to them. Okay, so I want to go one step further. When you're talking about those things and trying to educate them and paint a picture for them, do you even bring up the concept of tagging data, or do you just, you know, don't even try to get down to that level? You're still just trying to tell them why data is important and trust us, we're going to figure a way to organize it? Or do you actually get into conversations with any of them about tagging data and try to explain why this is important?
Do we have any slides? Slides?
I don't know if we have some of their slides or
Yeah,
not.
are those slides available to us? I'm going to try. Anyways, when we talked to these guys, when we brought up some of the main topics, some of them said, oh, I got a really good slide that would support my conversation, right? But they're disorganized, so let's see if they're available anyways.
Because there's one
No,
that
they're
says...
not.
They're not there? Okay.
I don't think we do.
No.
Anyway.
No worries.
all right.
So we tried to get them there, but no.
I was going to say, you know, the hand puppets. Yeah.
So I think I can easily talk this through. I just had a visual might be a little bit more helpful. So to your point, John, organizations and the business decision maker, the person that spends the money to do what we want to do, they're not techie typically. I mean, I think most people, that's not always the case, but they're not they're usually or have been technical, and they're not in that field anymore. They understand this value of data. How we typically will introduce the tagging concept is we may not use the word, right? Because that can sound a little scary, if you will. We're going to tag 10,000 points in your building, and don't you worry about it, but this will be the answer.
Tagging, what's that? You know.
So typically what we will talk about is that we bring up this concept of you have to drive actions in your building, right? The whole goal here is to enable the organization to do work, make decisions in a different way, and that data can be at the foundation of doing that. And there's two places where that can go really, really wrong. The first place is, and I'm sure most people in this room have experienced the pain, is how do you get the data out of the building? And to get the data out of the building so you can go into the cloud and do the big data analytics, and you can explain that to the business decision guy pretty well. They see that's an important thing, but they can see how that could be an issue. So we introduce the problem that it sits in front of us, and then I'll typically go to, do you have kids? Do they use Facebook? And we talk about the concept of, do they tag their friends in pictures? And explain that, and they get that. So, well, we could take that same concept and we can do it in the building, and there's standards that are around that, and there's communities that do that type of thing, and then we can go into that conversation. So that's one.
Okay.
The other piece is, and we call this cycle, if we had the slide up, and the OODA cycle, which is observe, orient, decide, act. And if any of you folks use software for Scrum or Scrum Development Agile, you're very familiar with that concept. And we apply that in the smart buildings world and said, tagging helps you observe the data, and technology enables you to do that. And that is the first challenge that you face and that you can overcome. And then we'll go through the cycle and they'll be quiet. The other piece of it is that we like to emphasize very early on is that while tagging is a great way to get to the observe piece and the observe, orient, decide, act, technology is typically, but there's few of you guys are starting to do it, the very small percentages can do the act. And unless you go all the way through that process and get to an action, the technology is not creating true value in your as a customer. So we like to orient folks to that concept. So to your point, we present tagging as the solution to a problem that exists, and we also then focus on how people are going to have to be involved in the conversation.
Okay, all right. So Matt, really the same question. How much of a discussion do you actually get into about this with the people you serve in your business?
Yeah, I mean, that's a fun question in itself, right? Because you can have everything from the large stakeholder meeting where you have everybody from the BAS building technician up to the chancellor for the campus. And then you can have small focus meetings. And what I would say to that really is not too far from what Rob's saying, but really to get in there with your client and, number one, understand the objective. What we've found in using analytics for a broad spectrum of delivery on projects is that you're going to start to find the synergies between what you can do with it and what your client or your potential customer is trying to do. And then once you start to bridge those gaps and make those connections, you bring up real examples from past projects or real examples in conversation as to how you're going to do it. And you can put that on a whiteboard in terms of, hey, customer, what's your network look like now? Where's your data now? What kind of automation systems do you have right now? Well, where do you want to be in 5 years? How do we get there? And then strategically talking about how to do it. Now, analytics comes into that conversation eventually. But if you're not in sync with your customers' goals and you're not working with them strategically to put together a plan to get there, you may not hit the nail with the hammer on the first try if you just go in and pitch analytics. It really is about putting together something that's going to work long-term for everybody. I would also add to that finding a strong internal champion who understands what you're trying to accomplish and how to do it with the tools that are available now and how those tools work with their existing workflows and their existing management structures is absolutely key. The most success we have, especially on the ACT piece of getting the issues boots on the ground folks that are going to fix the problems, is having somebody internal to that organization that can see it through. Because you're not going to be able to. You're going to be able to provide some of the most fantastic analytics in the world, but if somebody's not out there turning the wrenches, then you nailed it. You're not adding value.
So Matt, who typically is that internal champion?
It can
Or is there a
typical
internal
champion? I think today we call it an energy manager, is the term that I hear most. We see a lot of this coming from facilities, I think, more than down from the C-suite, and a champion in facilities that can manage broad scale and understands the concepts, but also understands the technology and how to get the data out, because that's a huge challenge. Tends to be that internal champion.
Okay.
So Zach, you're a little different perspective on that question. I mean, did you have to have these conversations inside, or you just did all the tagging in secret and said, they don't need to know about that?
Somewhat the latter. And what's interesting over the last 3 years is it's changing, too. We adopted the tag semantic model in the last, about 3 years ago. We migrated from an in-house tool. And as doing that, that's allowed us to have conversations and start to present, hey, there's this tools out here that we can use. It's an industry standard. You know, it's not just something that we built in-house. And over the last 3 years, a lot of people are like, oh, analytics, okay. And that's partly because of the customers and maybe the energy services model that Constellation is involved with and that we're talking to. But so in those cases, we take care of it. You know, we get all the data in, and we need to know. We know we need to do certain things with it. You know, maybe a little bit of background in terms of how we're applying the platform is slightly different from what I've heard over the last day or so. Is that, you know, in many cases, many of you are creating tools where you really get a lot of information and you go deep and narrow on a particular project. I'm kind of faced with the alternate environment where I've got a lot of projects and I've only got so much resources that I can apply to them. You know, I need to meet certain obligations and reporting and analytics that I have to do. So mine is a somewhat more shallow, you know, to the level that I'm at now. So in those cases, we take care of it. But what's interesting, and I said a minute ago, is that more and more the conversations we're having, people are saying, okay, so what kind of analytics platforms and tools are you guys using? You know, what are you going to bring to the table with the projects that we're doing? And in some cases, they're very involved and have an energy manager or somebody knows what that means and wants to do it. But in a lot of cases to date still, we're informing them and we're having conversations on multiple levels, you know, at the financial level and at the facility manager level. So it varies.
Okay. And Ben?
So I'd say recently we had our first meeting with an owner that knew about tagging, and so it was kind of a sales pitch, and they knew it, and then it was like, all right. So
that means Project Haystack's been doing their job if they knew it. Okay, so that's good.
Thanks to all of you here. But yeah, for the most part, owners, you know, not necessarily familiar with tagging, but what's kind of been working for us is bringing up case studies and just showing, you know, this is what your building is doing right now. You know, here's a peer building that we did a project at. They were kind of similar to your situation right now, and here's the actual deliverable we gave to them. Here's how we're working with them now. You know, and I think that kind of bridges the gap to help them see what the end goal is and how they're going to actually, you know, make changes in the building to get to energy savings.
Okay, cool.
Around the value concept, and as far as tagging is a solution to multiple problems.
Okay.
Okay, so at least this is an epiphany, if you will, to us a few years ago. I'm Mark and John know me. I'm pretty nerdy, right?
Very nerdy.
Very nerdy. So I love technology, and this idea that technology could help this energy and operations conversation was something that we were really focused on, and we still are. Mm-hmm. But had this epiphany, and just listening to the industry and talking to smart people like John and Mark and lots of others. See Howard sitting out there in front of me too, and that data is just not about energy and operations. Mm-hmm. It's about two other things that are a lot bigger than the energy and operations. Mm-hmm. One is this workspace, this 87 billion square feet of square footage that are out there, and how do you use that better? And on average, that's about somewhere $28 to $32 a square foot of space that's out there that organizations are spending money on. Mm-hmm. And this data can help make better decisions on that, not just on this energy and operations. And then there's the salaries that we pay all these organizations and the workplace that they work in. And that's around $300-something.
So you're having that conversation now. You're able to engage that discussion, and you're finding a receptive audience?
Yes, you're finding a receptive audience, and to your point on the champions, you can start to build a team of champions, because the champions aren't just in the facilities group anymore, or just at the CIO. This is really exciting to me. This is where budget money already exist.
Ooh, that's
Key,
exciting.
money exists, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know about it, you guys, but we spend a lot of time fighting for new budget creation.
Yeah.
And if you can go into an organization, solve a problem with tagging that creates value in a budget that already exists, that's a lot faster industry adoption and more money in your pocket.
Good.
Okay.
So
Cool.
Good, good. All right, I think it's time to move on to another topic, or unless you...
No,
you
no, go ahead.
okay. So, this industry over the years, we rely on specifications. So as tagging, data, analytics, fill in the blank, whatever you want, has started to trickle up and, become more important, and people are realizing it. Are you, especially for Ben and maybe Matt on this side, and then Zach, are you starting to build this into your specifications? When they, as you're sitting down, figuring this out, immediately, is this stuff coming into those spec designs?
Ben?
So, yes, we recently, we have a number of projects where it is in the specs. I think we still need to work through exactly
Hold your mic up.
what and how we want to include in the specification. But yeah, I expect some calls from controls contractors in the coming months here, asking about what Project Haystack is, and
Cool.
so yeah.
Yeah, I would say a resounding yes.
Okay.
And you have to, especially if you're working with a campus of buildings or a large-scale deployment where you want to make that a standard. And I think there's huge efficiency to be gained by making it a standard. If you have a client or a customer, or you yourself as a client or a customer are trying to say, I want analytics on my buildings. Well, you can't, I wouldn't recommend, and this may or may not be a popular opinion, but going to the next analytics vendor and saying, start putting it on the buildings without a plan in place ahead of time,
Bingo.
a very strategic plan, to have a standard. Standard BAS point names, standard analytics, standard tags that go with those BAS point names. Because you won't be able to efficiently scale if you don't build it into your specs and your standards. And so that's step one with most of our clients, is sitting down and saying, well, what does that even mean that you want to do analytics? Here's where we start. And it all starts with the understanding of it and the specs and the standards.
All right,
Absolutely.
so I won't follow up on that. Okay, so we had control systems, we had Division 17, we got Division 25, they moved the low voltage over there. So where do you move data, the ethereal, you can't touch it? We're going to have a new division here?
It's all of the above, to be honest with
It's
you.
what?
It's all of the above. You
Yeah.
need to go back to your building automation spec, and you need to get standard point names in there. That's a solid place to start. And to all the system integrators in the room, anybody here that has ever put a point name into a BAS, my advice to you is use a standard, any standard, some standard. Please use a standard. Because to us as people trying to connect to these systems, even if you haven't started to use analytics or don't have a perfect template for those point names, as long as you use the same thing each time, that makes the processing of existing building data 10 times easier. But to find randomization in buildings is absolutely the hardest challenge to overcome, importing the data. Start there. Start with your BAS spec 230900 and get your standard names in there. From there, you need to develop what I would call a standard around analytics. And I don't even think that looks like a spec section, in my opinion. That is a standalone document that conveys what you're trying to accomplish, what analytics you're going to use to get there, and then the tags that associate with the point names that correlate with that initial BAS spec that are going to feed into those rules. And I had a slide that I would have put up. It's sort of a futuristic slide. It
We're working on that back there now, trying to
great.
get some of those up.
If you have it, it's the network architecture diagram with the stack and the edge devices on it. But essentially what I'm trying to convey is today the way we do it, an SI goes out or a BAS vendor goes out, and he's in charge of the point names. In most cases, now that is turning around quickly. especially with large-scale clients that have just been dealing with that for years and understand the pains that come with it. Imagine if that was, turn that on its head and we handed a BAS specification to a vendor and said, try and get these names as good as you can, because never are they going to get it spot on right the first time through. And nobody's perfect. And we're admitting that. So what you can do is then have devices that share that tagging information. So right now, the protocols in the automation industry, they don't share metadata like Haystack does. So imagine all the way down at the edge being able to share that metadata up to the supervisor, up to the third-party tools, so that now with broad-scale analytics, we can QC the job all the way down to the edge device and say, here's a list of point names that we missed. And these 5 analytics aren't working because, hey, all the way down there on fan coil 2, you did your 12 fan coils supply air temperature wrong. Please go fix it. They fix it. It floats all the way back up to the top, and your analytics work. You know, that's the future. That's where we want to see these archetypes go. But today, there's not a lot of governing over that process and the names and the data, and we're rebuilding databases. We create it once down here. We build it again in the supervisor. Some third-party poor person has to plug into that and make sense of all of it. That's usually us. And it's really difficult. So by employing these standards, you're going to help make that whole process faster and more efficient.
Is that your slide or not?
That is not. It is not. It
Is
looks.
that your slide? Oh, there you go. There's your
It looked
slide.
like a great
All right,
slide,
well, we
though.
tried.
That looked like a fantastic
apologize.
slide.
All right. So Zach, you got a comment
I was
on
gonna
this,
say,
and then I
let-
want to come back to Ben on this
Yeah,
guide
yeah.
spec thing,
No,
because
give
I
it
have
to
another
Zach,
question on the
Zach,
guide
yeah.
spec.
So I qualify that's excellent when you can dictate what the point names will be. But there's also quite a few buildings and systems of various ages and degrees that already have point names, and it's very expensive to go back and change them. And you know, one of the things I'm taking away from this conference in the last, from yesterday and before, is really, you know, I'm excited by the machine learning algorithms people are applying towards changing the names. And, you know, I've had to do that in the very most basic sense. But I can see, you know, that's definitely an area of development that can improve on that facility. So, you know, good on us for focusing there, and keep up the good work. Let's make it better, make it easier, make that Omicron available.
Absolutely.
So Ben, on the guide spec question, or to expand on the spec thing, we in Project Haystack tried to put a guide spec together, right? We've been exposed to what you guys do, but I'm not a consulting engineer. So is it okay? And you know, if you have to tear it up every time, you know, feed that back to us so we improve it, unless of course you're trying to keep that as your secret sauce or something. But comment on the guide spec?
So yes, we downloaded it, went through it, and I sat down with the engineering directors, and
Yeah.
we did change it up a bit to kind of.
He said this is crap?
To be no, it was good, and it's the basis of it, no doubt about it.
Okay.
But we tried to.
We just
you know,
got our new group to help refine the guide specs, DLR.
I know.
We're in.
Thank
We're
you.
in.
Yeah, you know.
Yeah. But no,
But
we
yeah, I
don't want to
think
because we need to learn.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we tried to kind of make it a bit more open, I guess, to, you know, to allow just about any contractor to be able to meet that. And I guess, you know, from our perspective, on these first couple projects, we were expecting to be the analytics provider.
Okay, well, yeah,
and
you're gonna be
and so,
part of
yeah, well, that may not be the plan for as it's rolled out further.
Okay.
But yeah, so I think
So
we
just to
kinda
mention
opened
to
it up a
everybody,
bit.
there is a guide spec. It's on projecthaystack.org. It's in Word doc form, and I would be glad to get comments from not only the panel, but everybody else. I don't think it's been updated in probably 2 years. So
Yeah.
if there's input, let's all help, right, to streamline it. So, okay. Any others on that?
I would just say that you have to start somewhere, and that's out there. It's in the
Yeah.
community, so grab it, take a look at it, and we'll do the same and take a look at that doc.
All right. So can I ask the next one, Bob?
Yeah, you got it.
I'm gonna bring-
Yours.
So, because I'm hearing a theme here, you know, we're kind of down in the weeds talking about tagging, which you said, you know, maybe you talk about it to certain people or at a certain stage in the process, or when you're down to the guys who are going to help you execute or whatever. How about let's go up the other direction? Conversation with owners, operators, your internal team about data management strategy. Comments on that? That's a high level thing. Start with Rob.
Yeah, data, it becomes a very robust conversation inside the organization, let's just say that. Because typically you're going into an enterprise and there is already a data management strategy for traditional enterprise data. So by that I mean data warehouses. Typically, you'll see it in a corporation that they are familiar with that, and they want to take all this data that we produce out of buildings, Internet of Things in general, which is not structured, right? And the traditional enterprise is dealing in a world of very structured data, or a lot of structured data. And we're introducing into an equation this unstructured, and they want to provide their set of tools to go fix a problem that is not necessarily, those tools are not apt to go do that. Yeah. So there is now this conversation that has to take place with pretty senior IT guys that don't necessarily understand this whole world of unstructured data, and where we're seeing that lead to more and more is this concept of a data lake of some sort, where the organization is taking that data and putting it into a place, because here's the benefit to us in the room, is that we need IT's buy-in, but we don't necessarily need all their skill sets, their traditional skill sets, to go do what we're trying to do, because it'll slow the process down. And there are ways to go do data lake solutions now, and I think several of you guys are familiar with that.
Can you define for the audience data lake from your perspective?
Okay, so from my perspective, it's pretty simple. I mean, everyone traditionally has talked about data warehouses. And data warehouses, to me, are a way, and I don't know the exact definition of data lake, but a way to structure, to put up in a normalized way structured data. And a data lake is a way to normalize unstructured data, because we don't know what's going to get thrown at us. I mean, I've talked to a lot of y'all here in the audience, and you've heard me say this theme of there's a difference between complicated and complex. And a lot of people use that word as they're the same thing. Okay. And we have a lot of tools in the traditional IT space to deal with complicated problems. And the difference between complicated and complex, if you really look it up, is that a car, a Tesla, is very complicated. But in a complicated world, if you input A and B, you get X and Y. Okay. And every time you input A and B, you get X and Y. In our world,
forget it.
Do we know that if we put A and B, we get X, Y, or Z and F, or it's always different? Okay. And a data lake allows us to deal with data in a way that is needed, because we live in a complex world. This is a complex problem. It's complicated, but it's really a complex problem, because we're dealing in a world where we don't always know the exact answer. When there's a problem that's happening in that building, there are 5 ways to solve that problem, not one.
Interesting perspective. Okay. Anybody else on data management strategy as a conversation with
Yeah, and if I start talking too much, just shut me down. But truthfully, I think we're getting into network security as well, just a little bit. And I want to touch on that, because you mentioned having the IT folks involved is a part of the process. How many folks in here are just starting to use analytics and connecting to buildings? I would say they're in their early years of it.
That was a question.
Yeah, show of hands. So I would tell you, or anybody who's still doing it, that like when we started doing this, IT was the biggest hurdle to solve. Getting connections, getting secure connections. Okay. IT security is one of the hot topics now too. And when you start talking with stakeholders at the higher level, John, to your question, you can avoid IT until the last minute when the project is a go and you have to make a connection, but that's probably the worst thing you could do. So I would just say have the IT folks in those meetings and get their buy-in from day one, because what you'll find is that there's a lot of C-suite folks that rely on their IT for good consultation and when it comes to matters of security. So if you don't have that IT buy-in from day one, you're going to run into some issues down the later and maybe have some non-starters.
Okay. All right. Others? Zach? Or?
Zach, Ben? So a question for you, Zach. So out of curiosity, so when you guys are out talking to potential customers and clients and whatever, and you're talking about data and ways you're going to help them and operate better, conserve energy, et cetera, do your folks ever bring up, well, part of this is a whole data management strategy that we have already created for you to get you that much quicker down the road?
That's an interesting question. I guess in some part, in my experience, many of the EMS systems that we're collecting data from, it's not often that they can pull up a year's worth of historical trend data, time series interval data. Very frequently, I'm trying to get in there as early as I can to start the collections. As an energy services company, we're primarily focused on retrofits, not new building. And so they don't necessarily consider, they drop it on the floor, I guess is what you can say. That's their current paradigm. So in some sense, we come to them and say, we have a solution. In order for us to do our reporting and look at information and do the analytics, we'll take care of the data for you, and we take it off-site, cloud-based solution. That's changing a bit. Again, I said some of our customers are asking for analytics tools, and they want their own versions as well. And in those cases, they have they're taking care of it when it's an in-house. Primarily, our services using cloud-based services. So for the most part, we kind of roll it into and provide them a package, because many of the customers we're talking to, it's a new, they're relatively newcomers. It's only through hearing about things like a SkySpark or another application like that, that they, oh, there's an analytics tool and we can use it. It's not just Johnson Controls, the EMS where I do and change the set points and the controls. So.
Ben, do you have a comment on DMS?
Yeah, I mean, I guess one comment is just always surprised by, for most of the buildings that we see, how little they're utilizing their data. And just, again, just going back to showing them the case studies of similar buildings and how that, a proper data management and analytics strategy at the building has ended up in a lot of good savings at the building. That's a strong case for encouraging them to take a closer look at it.
I'm going to stay on that theme, but it kind of takes maybe a little different direction. So people have been using data, they have been looking at data, they may not realize what data they have, a lot of those things. Any, just interesting anecdotes. I heard an interesting anecdote that when people, they had this data, and then they started to get into it, and then they all of a sudden started to think, well, wait a minute, this might be sensitive data. The temperature value in the president's office might actually be a security risk. I mean, any crazy stories you want to share along those lines about how you all of a sudden ended up in a discussion you wouldn't have expected because you exposed that they have valuable data or risky data? Or anything on those? Rob?
I have a lot of times you can't talk about these things, right?
Yeah, we don't want any customer
Come on,
names,
Rob,
obviously.
So
Just bizarre stories.
We have a federal customer, so that's pretty open about that, and it's sort of funny, but it gives you example. I guess the theme here is that transparency to data can make people vulnerable that used not to be vulnerable.
Right.
That's a
that's
key,
okay.
that's a key thing. So many of you probably have been to courthouses, right? And we have a customer.
Wait a minute, hold it. And which way? The courthouse. No, hold it. This crowd probably, yes.
Maybe last night, right?
Yeah.
So in federal courthouses, you have the judge is the king, right? They are appointed in the executive branch. The federal judges are appointed and appointed to their role, and they can't be touched. So we have lots of courthouses with one of our customers that we're getting lots of data that's going on in their courtrooms and so forth. And we would go say that that is not efficient. And they would say, and I have been in meetings, and this is the words, I'm from North Carolina, so I always hear this in a southern voice for this old judge saying this to me, saying, son, you're with, because I'm a consultant, the executive branch, and I'm with the judicial branch, and you can't tell me what to do. But the point is that just because, back to the observe, orient, decide, act, just because data finds all this stuff and we understand what it can do and the value, there is a change management aspect of this and a need to have champions that are there to help you navigate this. Otherwise, we don't get to the act, and we don't get to the savings, and we don't create the value, and they don't come back for more. I'll point out one other thing, though, be quiet, and that is that when we're dealing in a world of data, because we're all really excited and passionate about this, there's a desire to make the results of the data as robust as possible. And I would advocate that as you are going down this journey and with your customers, or if you're trying to get into organization, don't try to tackle the whole thing at once. Don't try to bite the apple. Don't try to eat the elephant, whatever the analogy is. Take little pieces one at a time and get it around, whatever you want to call that cycle. We call it the OODA loop. Whatever you got, get stuff around that and get the organization start changing so you can go faster and faster and faster and faster.
Very good.
Stories. All right. Well, I have made a lot of IT folks grumble. But the one I'll share most recently is we're working on a broad-scale deployment of a lightweight energy management system across a number of car dealerships. So what we're doing is going after demand management of different things in the building. I can't give all the details away because it's a new kind of exciting thing that we're getting involved in. And the short story is we're putting in the lightweight EMS to go after easy demand opportunities to offset some demand peaks we know are coming as a product of things dealers are installing. And a part of that has been working with the dealerships in person, and they all have different IT teams. Now, typically, you work with a large-scale client with many buildings. You work with one IT group. You have a couple meetings that are pretty painful. You get through them. Everybody understands that it's just the temperature from Joe's office. Eventually, everybody's on board with that. But when you have to work with multiples, it's an ongoing thing. So we had to come up with a way to approach that repeatedly. And I will tell you, the first team that we worked with that manages many dealerships said, no, we have a closed-door policy. The best security is nothing. Nothing in, nothing out. And we said, well, okay, all right, what do we do here? And this is going to come to you eventually. And so I would say when you're working with IT teams like that, you're going to have to challenge them. And being able to successfully challenge those folks comes with understanding the territory that you're in and knowing the language, like what kind of tools are we going to use in the IT world to make these connections. So we had a long-winded conversation where we started introducing them to tools that they, I think, behind the scenes, they knew about, but it went against one of their core policies. And at the end of the day, they really had to come around and change their core policy, which was a series of really interesting conference calls with a particular individual who was vocal about his opinion on the matter. But this is coming, and again, those real-world examples, being able to share that from past projects. You know, we work with resort and casino type clients where we have live connections to the data systems, but that comes back to that data management strategy of keeping valuable data that is sensitive separate, physically or virtually at a minimum, isolated from the networks that we're trying to connect to analytics. So just understanding that IT side and how all that works goes a long way when you're having a conversation with somebody.
Ben, you get a comment?
Yeah, so I'd say we've been rolling out a lot of indoor air quality sensing and
Oh, yeah.
monitoring. And you know, I think the first thing when we're doing that and the building owner sees it, and they're kind
a
of like,
risk.
well, you're only going to share that if it's good, right? And so, yeah, I mean, that's definitely something that owners, have been hesitant about as we've been.
So as engineers, we got to
data a
think
lot.
beyond, oh, this is a good thing to do, to like, oh, this might piss somebody off. Okay. Anybody, comments?
It's definitely an issue. We have federal customers, and they're very leery about certain information going off-site. In large part, no automated data collection or delivery. And that's understandable because I don't think there's a solution yet that's been, vetted and adopted that they find acceptable. I think that that's necessary and going to be, especially as buildings get smarter and we have the Internet of Things, et cetera. So that's a solution that needs, we need to find for it. Delayed data helps. If it's a month old, they're a little less,
Yeah, less sensitive.
less
yeah.
sensitive. I absolutely agree with what Matt was saying. Is if you've got a good basis and a foundation and being able to talk network, that helps significantly. I come from a networking background. I did solar monitoring and the like for a decade and more, which, as an aside note, what we're doing here is very similar paths, and I'd say it's very exciting times because things are going up. But having a core facility language to talk networking to your customers and be able to answer their questions, know in advance. You're having these conversations all the time. Put together your answer sheets and make sure the people who are communicating them are able to deliver that message. That's important.
So before we ask any other, I think we want to, in the
Just
remaining
one-
time, see if we have some questions for the
Oh,
audience.
yeah, but just one quick question. So this whole conference is about making data real, okay? And just real quick, maybe 30 seconds each, we'd like you to cite an example where tagging Haystack was used and what the outcome was. So XYZ project, yes, we did this, and ultimately part of the data and tagging led to Y, almost to your A, B, X, Y thing. Right. So who wants to go first?
All right, lightning round.
Yeah, it is a lightning round.
Well, I mean, we have a lot of customers that we have enabled Haystack tagging for. I think one of our bigger ones is looking at 1 billion data points a month.
Wow.
Okay.
1 billion.
But then
And-
Haystack, though, is
Wi-
helping
Without
manage
Haystack, that
You
doesn't
can't-
happen.
Yeah, okay.
Because we're dealing with a portfolio of 80+ buildings that are geographically dispersed across the entire country, and they were built in ranges of 2 years ago to 100 years ago with different facility management companies, with different engineering. I mean, without tagging, you can't solve the complexity.
Perfect. Okay. All right, Matt, let's just keep it rolling.
All right, so this is a personal favorite of mine. It's a project I'm just coming off the heels on. We have a particular client, a smaller client that we get to, I would almost say, get to test bed a lot of the new technologies that are coming out with, and you can do that in that kind of environment where, anyway, so we've gone all the way from field controller up to cloud analytics with all Haystack technology.
Haystack at the edge device.
Not at the field controller.
Okay.
It's the only spot that doesn't have Haystack, but it's a BTL open BACnet product. The folks that produced it are in this room. And that we deployed our standard names at the field level, which went through a standard tagging tool at the BAS, which was developed with help from folks in this room. And that put the tags on it instantly without having to do custom work. That ported to our cloud deployment, our analytics cloud, where those pre-named and tagged points had analytics deployed on them with less effort than ever before.
Okay.
And so we've got that real example now. It's like, hey, we've been talking about this. It was the slide. I saw it made it up there. Thank you, briefly. And but we've taken that as far as we can with what's available today
Okay.
And the efficiency's there, and that was really exciting.
Okay.
So thanks, Haystack, and everybody for helping with that.
Zach, you're up.
For some reason, sticks in my mind is really when we transitioned from an in-house product to a tag-based platform. You know, very early on, you know, there was data. We were collecting data, and you know, we were writing reports already. This is an existing project that we were in a performance phase with, and using tag-based model and analytics, very quickly we could show a report just simply run times. And lo and behold, you know, a customer saw on you know, nice pretty charts that a number of their units, I think it was more than 80% of their systems were a manual override. And within a month, they'd gone back and shut down at least 20% of them. They didn't know. So, you know, to me, that's one of the most telling.
Yeah,
That's a good one.
That's great.
That's impact. Yeah.
Yeah, so just, you know, in our retro commissioning projects, so we've integrated and got some trend data historically, and we're going into a building for a first meeting, and we're like, all right, well, you've been leaving these 4 air handlers on. Looks like a couple of the economizer dampers aren't moving. You've got a couple reheat valves leak and a couple bad PID loops. So kind of just quickly drilling into issues and spending more time figuring out the solutions to those on site, and being more effective on site.
Good.
Okay. All right. So in the remaining time, and Scott, I'm
And
gonna
stand up and yell so everybody
we got
can.
some, Scott, you're going to run around and give
Scott.
people a
There you go.
microphone so
Good.
everybody can hear their questions. Go for it. In the back. Anybody, are you asking a question, or are you trying to get people to ask questions?
Sit back down, Jason.
Go for it.
Yeah, no problem. So I think a lot you guys were talking about how Haystack solves analytics up there, right? I think it's important for the community to know that there's a lot of companies out there that are using Haystack to solve other problems as well. So Tritium uses tags to solve their templates, right? So now you could do, they have a real new feature that came out. Periscope uses tags to build their dashboards, right? So I was wondering if any of you have used tags to solve other things like control logic or other things.
Well, I mean, the number one use case is going to be analytics, hands down. And we see that transforming into other markets too. So yes, there are third-party tools out there now that you can do control logic, tag-based control logic. And I think like the value in that is going to be the one-to-many concept. At least that's what we've seen, playing around with it for controls particularly. Being able to broadcast things out based on tags rather than the copy and paste mentality, which I think is a little more prevalent now in building automation systems. But hands down, again, back to that slide, third party, being able to plug in with any kind of third party to that point, controls, visualization, enhancements to your legacy data systems or existing data systems is going to be driven by that standardization of tags.
Okay. Another?
Somewhat associated, I'd say the Haystack connector has been very useful for us. It's the glue between a lot of the, our databases and the data feeds that we get, and that's been very handy.
Yeah.
I'd say that, yeah, beyond the analytics, I'd say no, we haven't done a ton of the other things that you're talking about, but feeling the good energy at the show here and seeing the great solutions, definitely looking forward to doing more of that.
Okay, great. Question?
Yeah, heard an interesting perspective yesterday where they were saying, as we're out there deploying analytics, we're exposing issues and problems, and then some within our clients that we're working for will feel exposed and kind of vulnerable because of that. How do you guys deal with that aspect of the work we do?
Yeah, we only get one now. So.
Yeah, we're down to one.
I think that's a great question. That's a great question, and you need to address that proactively, not reactively. And what we have typically seen or learned over the years is we have developed a message of the benefit to the organization and the WIFM, what's in it for me. And what we will typically do is identify the different stakeholder classes inside of an organization, whether it be the engineers or the occupants or the CFO's office, and work with the organization to sort of really understand their org chart and get inside their heads of what's in it for each one of those groups. And there is an internal marketing campaign, if you will, that you have to be proactive about so that you can address those issues. And doing it reactively and saying, oh crap, it just came up, it won't work, and you can strike fear in an organization and slow down the adoption process.
Okay. I'm just going to, I think that's a great theme because we encounter, I want to ask you, Zach, you just had an example. You showed them 80% of this stuff was overridden. Did you have to pause and go, how am I going to break this news to them so I'm not insulting them? I mean, you know, really. Did you think about that? Because I can tell you one time when we were early on, we thought it was great to show people. It turned out really bad.
Depends on how you message it and who you message it to
That's
first.
what we learned. We're slow, but it took a while.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would just add like real examples of that. Be cognizant of who's in the room, because if you just found a whole bunch of equipment that's in hand and you're standing next to the facilities manager who's in charge of all that equipment that's in hand, and to your right is his boss, well, you need to phrase that carefully. And let's be honest, like, there's so much data out there that maybe that facilities manager doesn't have the tools to know that all that's in hand, and that's what we're talking about. So like getting that information across is key.
Questions, Gert?
Near the end, so we get one more question.
Hi, it's a question about the future of IoT. So yesterday there was one sentence saying that with tagging and Haystack, a new level of interoperability can be gathered. So today what we see is beyond communication via BACnet, Modbus, and so on, more and more startup companies develop their own IoT protocols. And I am afraid about a future where we have islands of technologies and not IoT. So could Haystack and tagging standardization be a means for creating a new level for interoperability for edge devices?
I think the simple answer to that is yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, can we get that diagram one more time? I think it is, and on a number of levels. Like when you get into IT, you have to start talking protocols, right? And right now, the devices that are out there, the standards that are out there, don't enforce necessarily the best practice protocols when you cross from that building layer out to the enterprise layer. So like one of the things Haystack does is use protocols that use security levels like authentication, which you might not have if you're passing BACnet IP across a campus of buildings. So like absolutely, is it going to bridge the gap? We know it's going to bridge that gap between getting the standards to float up, but it does other things for the future of IT as well, like enhance your network security, which is something an IT person is going to love to hear all day long.
All right, one last thing, and this is based on a conversation John and I had, I don't know, in one of our late nights, you know, trying to put this thing together. Your short 30 seconds on this one. This is a surprise for you guys. And hear this. Data is more valuable than the cost of the device. Yes, no, comments. Data is more valuable than the cost of the device.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, if it can show you something that's operating in hand, it shouldn't be. There's a lot of expense and fuel that can go to that.
Okay, that's yes. Just yes or no. Each panel, please.
Yes, the device exists to serve up that data so we can use it to do things.
Okay.
So I draw an analogy. Is a cell phone more valuable than the call that it makes?
Good one. Oh, pontificate, Rob.
And
pretty good.
I don't
Professor,
know.
you know?
I don't know about you, but don't pay a lot for cell phones these days.
Right.
But you pay a lot for the service that comes along with them.
Okay. And Ben?
Ben, you're
Yes, as well. If you can use data to improve a building's energy efficiency by 5%, that
so resounding
over
from
time
this
certainly
this
covers the
team, this
devices.
group up here. Data is more valuable than the cost
physical
of that
products.
device. Yeah. Okay.
All right, well, I want to thank our panel, and thank you all. Where we going? Yeah, perfect. Another point.